May we be reminded here of our greatest, our highest aspirations. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but connected in victory and miracle to the universe, to this community, and to each other. Good morning to you all, and welcome to our service here on November 7th at First Parish Church in Weston. I'm Sarah Napoline, the Assistant Minister for Families and Community Outreach. Unitarian Universalism is a historic faith with a progressive theology. We are bound together not by creed, but by covenant. We are all deeply interconnected, and we commit to answering the call of love with open minds, open hearts, and open hands. These past 2 years have been challenging times indeed, and First Parish can be proud of the many ways we have found to keep in touch, to care for one another, and to reach out and help our community. We're delighted to be back in our sanctuary this fall after a year of worship outdoors and online. We are still recording our service, and a lightly edited version will be available later today or tomorrow. This technology has also allowed us to expand our worship to include a live stream on Zoom. Hello. We welcome everyone online and everyone watching later this week. Today, we are pleased to welcome the Reverend Dr. Art McDonald, who will be our guest preacher today. Our organist and pianist is Jeffrey Weeding, and our music director is Bill Sano. Our service is live streamed, recorded, and produced today by Jacob Barz-Snell with assistance from members of our AV team. You're invited to join us for a well-ventilated and socially distanced social hour that begins just after the service down in Fellowship Hall. We also invite you to review the announcements in your order of worship and to check out our upcoming gatherings and programs, including our weekly Wednesday meditation and the Monday gathering of our knitters and stitchers. And the Halloween candy may or may not be gone, which means that the holiday season, of course, is upon us. We will have many opportunities to get involved and give back this winter, starting with our annual canned good collection for the Council on Aging Food Pantry. You probably already saw the boxes out in the breezeway, and there are some down in the vestibule near the church office. You can find more information on our website and in our weekly email newsletter. And now we want to say welcome. Welcome to one and all. If you're a new viewer or a new visitor this morning, you are welcome here. If you're a long-time member or a person whose family has come for generations, you are welcome here. Whether you've been hurt by religion, saved by it, or some of both, whether you're brand new to spiritual community or a seasoned seeker, whether you're in need of inspiration or comfort, whether you're seeking peace and quiet or jubilant connection, you are welcome here. Those of all nations, all cultures, all races, all ages, all creeds, all physical capabilities, all genders and gender expressions, all sexualities, and all kinds of families and love. Whoever you are, whatever you are, wherever you are on your journey, you are welcome here. And now I invite you to rise up in body or spirit with our opening hymn, number 525. We're singing verses 1 through 3. The peace of God be with you. I invite you now to exchange greetings of peace and love to your neighbors. And in continuing a tradition that we started online, if you'd like to text your loved ones, whether from here in church or if you're watching online or later, I invite you to just send that love to one another and to your neighbors. And now Carol McKean will come forward to light our chalice this morning.
Autumn officially began a month and a half ago, but it seems to have arrived in full force this week. Recently, high temperatures have been hovering in the 50s with overnight lows in the 20s and 30s. Last night we turned our clock backwards an hour, and today the sun will set around 5 p.m. The seasons are shifting, and the buzz of the upcoming holidays will usher in New England's colder, darker months. It is at times like this that the light of our chalice is more important than ever. We need the reminder of brightness and warmth for our own hearts and souls, but also so that we can bring that comfort and resilience to the interconnected community that surrounds us. As we light our chalice, may these words of David Pohl remind us. We come to this time and this place to rediscover the wondrous gift of religious community, to renew our faith in the holiness, goodness, and beauty of life, to reaffirm the way of the open mind and full heart, to rekindle the flame of memory and hope, and to reclaim the vision of an earth made fair with all her people one. May it be so. Amen.
I was about to put this in my ear. That doesn't really work. Thank you, Carol. Always an adventure when I'm running around and playing all the parts. Let's see if I can do this without smothering it. Aha, there we go. Now, I know this is going to shock you, but I'd like to tell you a story, if I may, briefly. Now, there once, probably not so long ago in reality, was a farmer. And now, this is a farmer out in the common farmlands, everyone, all of his neighbors, growing wonderful crops, vegetables, all these different things that we eat and that make us healthy and whole. And there was a competition every year, of course, for the best fill in the blank, the best tomatoes, the biggest pumpkin, the most wonderful corn. And so they had these competitions among farmers to encourage them to grow these luscious, wonderful vegetables. And one year, this farmer, he made the most wonderful, luscious, beautiful corn that anyone had ever seen. And he won the competition. And then the next year, it happened again. And then again and again. And well, one year someone else did, but they were kind of from out of state. And then he won it again and again. And so there came a time, finally, when people were wondering, gosh, you can't cheat when it's literally right there coming from the ground. How did this happen? How is he growing such wonderful corn? What was his secret? And so a reporter was chatting with him after he won the competition yet again. He said, what's your secret? What do you do differently than everyone else? Is it a different soil or a different fertilizer? What's the magic? And he said, oh, well, the secret is that I share my very, very best grains and corn and seeds with everybody around me every year. I share all of those seeds and give them to my neighbor. And the reporter said, you share them with your neighbor? You give it away? This amazing corn? How does that, that makes no sense at all. And the farmer said, oh, no, it makes perfect sense. because of course he's a farmer, so he actually gets this stuff. And he says, you see, there's cross-pollination among all of the plants around us, all of the harvest. And so the corn from my field and the corn from my neighbor's field and the one down the street, all of it crosses together and it helps them grow strong. And so I need my neighbor and my other neighbor and my other neighbor to have the very best corn, because when they do that, all of our corn grows strong and beautiful and luscious. It's cross-pollination. And so we really all need to share that with one another. And so that's how he grew the most luscious, wonderful corn in the entire region. And it's only because he kept sharing his bounty with everyone around him. And thus is our story for this morning. And now I invite the children to come with me out down the hallway to our classes for this morning.
I do have a reading this morning, but I couldn't help in listening to that wonderful story from Sarah of thinking of, you may have seen an obituary this week. Anyone who reads obituaries that will admit it, I do it every day, but of a man named Aaron Forstein, who ran this mill called Malden Mills, I think. And if you remember, many years ago, it burnt down. And after it did, he decided that he, for 3 months or so, was going to pay his workers, even though, of course, he didn't have to, but he just said it's the right thing to do. And when, my recollection is when his son said to him something like, "Dad, you're a businessman, you can't be doing that." And he quoted the Old Testament, the Jewish Bible, in saying why he absolutely had to do it. And it's a wonderful story. So if you haven't seen it, the Globe has a wonderful obituary. This is from the Acts of the Apostles, called the Early Christian Community. The whole group of believers was united, heart and soul. No one claimed for his own or her own use anything that she had, as everything they owned was held in common. The apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus with great power, and they were all given great respect. None of their members were ever in want. As all those who owned land or houses would sell them and bring the money from them to present it to the apostles. It was then distributed to any members who might be in need. Nice to watch the choir rearrange themselves nicely, quietly, and unobtrusively. I want to thank Sarah, wonderful story and wonderful hospitality. And also, someone who's hidden, young Jacob, Jeff's son, is doing all of the sound equipment. And Jacob, I don't know if he's in there or somewhere, maybe he's gone, but Jacob is responsible for you being able to hear all of us this morning. So thanks to Jacob, great work. And thanks to all of you for coming. You know, I was thinking when there's a substitute teacher, it's a good opportunity for students not to show up, right? But here you are. Here you are, ready for fire, so it's great to have you all here. Last time I was here, I've been here a few times, as maybe a few of you remember. Jeff and I are great friends from Salem days. But last I was here, speaking of obituaries, to honor the life and legacy of Bill Tyler, whose wife Angie and daughter Maggie are sitting right there in front of us. And lucky for me, they didn't know I was preaching today, so they showed up, and here I am, Meg and Angie. But that was a great celebration for Bill. So my wife, Melanie, and I were on a road trip for 2 weeks this past summer, all the way to Michigan and back, with several stops along the way. We planned this trip around, here we go, a memorial service for a close friend who died in Pittsburgh. My wife and I had lived in Pittsburgh, and I served a church there for 20 years. One of our stops was in Toledo, Ohio, to visit Melanie's first cousin, Judy, a recently retired Supreme Court judge in Ohio, Judy Lanzinger. Judy's husband, Bob, had died unexpectedly a few years ago, and this was our first visit since Bob's death. Over the years in our visits, we'd always talk about many things like family, of course, health and activities, and ultimately society, and on occasion, politics. Bob was pretty conservative in his thinking, Melanie and I somewhat less conservative. Judy, we could never figure out. Bob always dominated the conversation, even though she was the judge. She ran on a Republican ticket because her area was heavily Republican, and it's the only way she could win. But she rarely took a stand as Melanie, Bob, and I talked. It was always quite respectable and respectful, despite some major differences. Except one day when Bob looked at me and said, "Art, does the United States ever do anything right?" "Yikes," I replied, "am I that bad?" We laughed, sort of. On this visit, Melanie and I were surprised how much Judy talked. Certainly plenty about life with Bob. At times, sad and lonely was the conversation. But surprisingly, she often talked about social issues and values. Maybe being a judge kept her careful in expressing her views. But in retirement, she was set loose. Some of what she said probably disturbed Bob in the grave. She turns out to be a little closer to our own perspective, Melanie and mine. I think former President Trump maybe pushed her over the edge. At one point, reflecting on the divisions in our society at the current moment, I brought up the question of the common good and how it is so rarely discussed in the public arena. Judy agreed and went on to declare, as a constitutional scholar, "Do you know, Art, there's nothing much in the Constitution about the common good, except for this little phrase in the preamble about general welfare. But it never concretizes that in the body of the document. Mostly, there are thoughts about individual rights." Guess I never heard anyone of her background state that so clearly, and I began to wonder, what does this mean for us as a people? Then a few days later, as we continued our trip into Michigan, I picked up a copy of the USA Today, and the headline read, "When should liberty yield to the public good?" Whatever you think of the USA Today, if anyone ever reads it, it was a very stimulating piece. It was focused on, as you might suspect, the debate around vaccination or not. It was very helpful to my own thinking because I've had several conversations with people adamantly opposed to being vaccinated. A few friends for deeply political reasons, sniffing a conspiracy by pharmaceutical companies or the international community or capitalist elites or whatever. Another few conversations, more personal reasons. A nephew, for example, who's nervous about what's in the vaccine, doesn't really trust it. Quote, "At what point should individual rights yield to the public interest?" asked the article writer. If coronavirus kills 1 in 100 or 1 in 10? One philosophy professor suggested in the article, "We may be entering a period when countries will need to reassess their willingness to use the law to protect the most vulnerable and to advance the common good." Another political philosopher from Harvard, Michael Sandel, maybe some of you have read his works, and you can live stream him. He's very, very popular political philosopher. He recently wrote a book called The Tyranny of Merit, What's Become of the Common Good? And he writes, even as the pandemic highlights our mutual dependence, it is striking how little solidarity and shared sacrifice it has called forth. The pandemic caught us unprepared, logistically, medically, and morally. It arrived at just the wrong moment, amid toxic politics, incompetent leadership, and fraying social bonds. Echoing this sentiment, a religious scholar, Stephen Tipton, comments that many have lost trust in our institutions and government. And he actually traces it well beyond these last few years to words spoken by President Reagan, when President Reagan said the following, and I quote him, "The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, 'I'm from the government, and I'm here to help.' I'm from the government, and I'm here to help." You probably remember President Reagan went on to say, "The government is the problem." And that revolution, I think, is still with us. So what about the common good? What is it? If it's not in the Constitution, as Judy suggests, how do we talk about it or understand its relevance for society or the larger global community? Ironically, one of the institutions which I grew up in our society that has lost so much moral credibility in these last decades, the Catholic Church, at its best is a champion in its social teaching of the philosophy and theology of the common good, adopted from Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, expanded and deepened by the medieval theologian Thomas Aquinas, and recently updated and revisited beautifully by a theologian at Boston College, David Hollenbach. It serves as a linchpin, the common good, of Catholic, Christian, really, moral teaching. Yet we hardly ever hear about it. Both Aristotle and Aquinas reasoned that government had a key role to play in assuring the prominence of the common good in social policy. They saw government as important to assure justice for all. We are social animals. We are rooted in that interdependence, argued Aristotle. Though private property is an important value, it is always subject to the common good, argued Aquinas. Common good takes precedence. Although Catholic social teaching, dating back to 1891, in the more modern period, is central to Catholic social values, it's the best kept secret in the church. No one talks about it. Aquinas was not speaking in his medieval life to Christians alone, but to rulers in his society. My own theology and ethics, as I've transitioned into Unitarian Universalism, has still been profoundly influenced by this teaching, having been raised in that tradition and trained in seminary. And I consider it a fatal flaw in our country's history and foundations that this concept didn't find its way into our shared lives. But it could have been different. A great sociologist named Robert Beller, who published a few books, well, many books, but he published two on the prominence in our culture of individualism, he called The Habits of the Heart. He has written about the arrival of the Puritans in the first governor, John Winthrop, who on his arrival in 1650 articulated a vision for our country and its people in a sermon he entitled A Model of Christian Charity. In this sermon, Winthrop used the famous expression that we're probably all familiar with: we are to be a city set upon a hill, a beacon of light for all to see. And he went on to say, Winthrop, we must delight in each other, make others' conditions our own, rejoice together, mourn together, labor and suffer together, always having before our eyes community as members of the same body. As Robert Beller states in reflecting upon this vision, and it is an amazing vision, the Puritans' fundamental criterion of success wasn't material wealth, but the creation of community in which a genuinely ethical and spiritual life could be lived. This vision was fundamental to the notion that we are a Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We're in this together. We look out for one another. When one is affected, we're all affected. Robert Beller cites a great anecdote attributed to Winthrop. When it was reported to Winthrop during his especially long and hard winter that a poor man in his neighborhood was stealing from his woodpile, Winthrop called the man into his presence and told him that because of the severity of the winter and his need, he had permission to supply himself from the woodpile for the rest of the cold season. Thus, he said to his friends, did he effectively cure the man from his stealing. Reminds me of a little bit of the Dickens story, Christmas Carol, you know, Scrooge. After his conversion, when Bob Cratchit returned to work a little late after Christmas holidays, Scrooge sternly called him in the office and said to him, sort of gruffly, what do you mean by coming in here at this time of day? Step this way. I'm not going to stand for this sort of thing any longer, and therefore I'm about to raise your salary. I'll raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family, said Scrooge. So make up the fires and buy another coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit. I relive that every year I watch Scrooge. I can't get enough of it. So what about the common good? Theologian Drew Christensen writes, just what constitutes the common good begins with a dialogue. A dialogue. We need to come together and discuss it and our differences. It might look different in different contexts. It's ever evolving. Among other things, he writes, it will take this kind of an attitude, and I quote, consideration toward the opinion of others, self-restraint in pursuing one's own claims, willingness to persuade others over the long term, a desire for cooperation, a disinclination for divisiveness, and protective concern for the civil peace. That is, mutual understanding, self-examination, charity, and belief in the possibility of agreement. The possibility of agreement. Ultimately, he suggests, the common good means everyone in the society ought to be able to share in an advancing quality of life, meaning, among other things, that privileged individuals, groups, and nations must make sacrifice, even from their substance, to close the gap between themselves and the marginalized. You know, regarding that latter point, a Globe columnist named Shirley Lung a few years back quoted one of those privileged individuals as saying that when taxes had been higher for the well-to-do regarding paying higher taxes, this man said, "I was delighted. I felt privileged to be in a position to pay." This person saw taxes as an investment and a way to even the playing field, not a burden on individual enterprise or freedom. And next year in November 2022, unless somehow it's struck down by the courts, which I doubt it will be, there will be an opportunity to vote, by the way, on a ballot initiative 1 year from now, that will tax people who make over $1 million, not just have $1 million, but make over $1 million, at a different rate than the rest of us. So 9% versus 5%, so making our state tax a progressive tax. So stay tuned on that. As I deeply believe, part of what church or religious community is all about is practicing here what we hope to live out, not only here in church, but in the community. I heard Sarah say that she, among her responsibilities, is to be a community minister. Religious community is a kind of laboratory, if you will. I think we practice living out the common good when we participate in all sorts of community activities. We reach out and break down barriers. We share, we listen, we cooperate, we sacrifice. And look at what work has been done even in these churches, this church, to get us back together. All the work and the effort it took for the common good so that we could worship together once again in the midst of a pandemic that has been stressful for us all. It's taken the efforts of so many to accomplish this. When social activist and evangelical Christian Jim Wallace was in seminary, he and his fellow seminarians decided to read through the entire Bible, Older and Newer Testaments, to see how often the issue of homosexuality is mentioned or alluded to versus how many times the question of poverty or inequality and concern for the common good are mentioned. Sexual issues were outmentioned approximately 80-1. More or less 7 times that seemed to suggest something around homosexuality, in a different context, of course, but nevertheless about 7 times. 250 on the proper use of wealth, and 300 on the care for the poor and the work for justice in the Bible. When Jesus was crucified and later appeared as resurrected by his followers, it was described, his followers in the Acts of the Apostles, that early community decided that following Jesus meant living together in community and sharing all they had, as you heard. Everything for the sake of the common good. As for Unitarian Universalists, I've many times read a statement from our Universalist forebears who at Worcester, Massachusetts, in their convention in 1917, spoke against economic inequality and the creation of an economic order which shall give to every human being an equal share in the common gifts of God, and in addition, all that she or he shall earn by her own labor. Now that sounds like a pitch for the common good to me. Even though several months ago our Canadian friends were far behind us, the US, in their vaccination rate, partly due to lack of supply, they have now surpassed us in vaccination rates. I don't think it's a coincidence that they also have a much better sense of the common good than we do here. To all the Canadians I've ever asked about in my many trips across the northern border, 2 of my grandparents came from Nova Scotia, about their universal healthcare system, they always say, well, it's not perfect, there are issues, but we prefer it to yours. And how about Western Europe? Portugal's vaccination rate is over 90%. But the notion of common good is no longer just a local or national issue. its principles, it seems to me, must apply globally. In an era where we have deep concerns about climate, pandemic, world poverty, and immigration, the common good, it seems to me, should shape our government's thinking and decision-making on a global scale. And that is happening right now in Scotland, as you may have followed, around climate. Regarding immigration, there was a news story a few weeks back about a man on the border between Mexico and Texas holding a sign, and the sign simply said, "Stop deportation." When a reporter quizzed him on it and said, "Well, what would you do? I mean, this is a major problem, this flow of immigrants, right? What would you do?" And the man simply said, "I would invite thousands of companies down to the border and hire all these people." He said, "All they want is a job." If racism is what some call our original sin in the United States, I'd call the lack of a notion of common good in our history and Constitution our fatal flaw. Robert Bellar argues we are too individualistic, raising up individual rights at every turn, but never what is best for the whole. It's playing out now in tragic ways. The opposition to vaccination may be only one example. But it's not hopeless. In religious communities and social movements all over our country, I see people working and sacrificing for the common good, not the least of whom are healthcare workers. What great moral leaders they are. Through love and patience and concern and conversation and determination, I believe we can achieve a better sense of the common good if we do it together. And finally, I thank Judge Judy, Melanie's loving cousin, for raising this vital issue for me and help shaping my thinking. And I'm very grateful to Judy that she never asked me, "Art, is America ever doing anything right?" Amen. That same sociologist, Robert Bellar, whom I quoted earlier, gave a speech to the Unitarian Universalist Association in 1998, in which he suggested that our 7 principles be reversed And rather than the first one being the inherent worth and dignity of every person, he suggested that the first one should be respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. So my pastoral prayer this morning is simply a prayer for us to be made aware by our loving and just God of our connectedness, that we are in this journey, this spiritual journey, as one people, with different notions, different experiences, different backgrounds, but one goal: to build the beloved community. May we have the heart and the courage and the wisdom to bring that notion about in our lives, small and large. And I invite us all to say together the prayer that Jesus taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. And our great theologian, James Luther Adams, reminded us many, many years ago that the Sunday collection was a symbol of the separation of church and state, which is to say, opposed to those societies in which the government actually pays salaries of clergy and so forth. We live in a context in which the church is supported by its membership and its people, and not any government entity. So Luther Adams encouraged us all to be generous, recognizing that it is up to us to make religious community alive and well. I don't think we're passing the plate, but I do believe there are plates as we leave, so thank you. closing hymn is number 386 in the red hymn book of Truth and Light, number 386. May the light around us guide our footsteps and hold us fast to the best and most righteous that we seek. May the darkness around us nurture our dreams and give us rest so that we may give ourselves to the work of our world. Let us seek to remember the wholeness of our lives, the weaving of light and shadow in this great and astonishing dance in which we move and have our being. So be it. Amen.